Thousands of homeowners face forceful eviction from a 1,000-acre piece of land in Nairobi's Njiru area after court ruled that the property belongs to the family of former Starehe MP Gershom Kirima.
In all, the National Dialogue Committee finally agrees to adopt a proposal by the Azimio Coalition members to include the agenda on the cost of living in its list of thematic areas.
A very good morning and welcome to this edition of Morning Cafe. My name is Fred Ndimuli. It promises to be a fairly warm day, 29 degrees Celsius in Nairobi, with a 10% chance of rain. We'll have to wait and see if that comes. You know, the prediction with El Nino. We're still waiting. And I shall not relent in my promise to continue with my Christmas countdown. Today, it is exactly 62 days to Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you in advance.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now from the Mavoko land dispute to the Lavington land dispute to now the Njiru land dispute in Starehe, just shows how recurrent the land dispute cases have been. It is a balance of law, broken systems, as well as the culture that binds all these. And that is a conversation we'll be having at around 8 a.m. to just demystify what you should look out for when buying a land and even building to avoid being a culprit in the future. I'm Flora Limuki.
Namizutuli Stanley Nyiringita. Today is the second day of the KCSE exams, and basically the whole French, German, Arabic orals are continuing. And my proverb today is from South Africa, and it says, after you climb a mountain and reach the top, do not forget the shrubs that you stepped on while climbing. Think about that this particular morning. You can always chime in on the conversation on our socials at TV47KE on Facebook and at TV47 News on X. Let's get the big story by Fred.
To the big story, members of the National Assembly, allied to the Azimio Coalition, intend to disrupt House sessions this afternoon in protest at delays by the Speaker to announce changes to the position of Minority Whip. The MPs want Speaker Moses Wetangula to announce Embakasi West MP Mark Mwenje as a deputy Minority Whip to replace nominated MP Sabina Chege. Minority Leader Opiyo Wandayi has demanded that Wetangula announces the changes first thing today or they paralyze the afternoon session. On October 9th, the High Court paved the way for Sabina Chege's removal, arguing that she had not exhausted internal dispute resolution mechanisms within the Azimio Coalition as she sought to block her removal. Speaker Wetangula had cited the ongoing case for his inaction in effecting the changes, and now the minority side is accusing him of dragging his feet on the matter. That's our top story this morning. Let's now get the day's diary.
And on today's diary, first off, Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua jetted out of the country yesterday evening, going to Belgium and also Germany. He'll be representing the President, William Ruto, for a 3-day official visit. Away from that, we do have the whole tree growing exercise. We did see yesterday a couple of schools doing it, and this particular morning we'll be seeing Honorable Soipantuya, Environment Cabinet Secretary, leading police officers from the Kenya Police Service General Service Unit, that is GSU, Recce Company for Rapid Tree Growing Exercise at the unit's Ruiru Camp right in Thika Road, basically. And in the corridors of justice, remember the whole troops to Haiti kind of saga, and that the High Court Justice Chacha Mwita had stopped a couple of weeks earlier this month, actually. So this particular day, we'll be seeing directions being given on the same. And away from that, Departmental Committee on Transport and Infrastructure is scheduled to have a meeting with the Kenya Airways management regarding the whole performance of Kenya Airways today. And as I had alluded, today is the second day of the KCSE exams. And away from that also, we do expect TSE commissioners to be grilled by the Education Committee, the Departmental Committee in the Senate. All that and much more coming your way from around 9 a.m. in our county diary and also international diary. So stick around for that. Right now we can dive into the dailies this morning. Fred, I see you holding the Standard.
Yes, and even before we get into the dailies, on State of the Nation later this morning, we'll be having Barrack Muluka, strategic and political communications consultant, as well as P.L.O. Lumumba, lawyer and Pan-Africanist. Do stand by for that conversation you do not want to miss. Let's now take a look at the dailies, and we kick off with the Standard this morning. The big headline: murderers to get lighter sentence. That's a big headline on the front page of the Standard today. Radical proposals. Chief Justice Martha Koome is asking MPs to change the penal code, hence making punishment for capital offences less severe in light of global conventions. The story is on page 2. And it's quite an interesting headline, I must say. The other big story given prominence on the front page of the Standard this morning: talks team agrees to deal with high cost of living. The National Dialogue Committee members pictured there at the Lake Elementaita Mountain Lodge yesterday, where they are holding their retreat to prepare their report. Of course, the committee has already had its mandate extended by 30 more days. It shall now be required to submit its report on or before November 26th to Parliament, and August 29 is the date Parliament established the committee for an initial 60 days. The team has agreed to come up with proposals to make life better for Mwananchi. Those are the two big stories on the front page of the Standard. Other highlights: Ruto walks diplomatic tightrope in China visit. Experts claim the trip, during which President Ruto attended the third Belt and Road Initiative Forum, was overshadowed by the Kenyan president's growing fling with the West. The story is on pages 14 and 15. Other highlights: learners prepare to seat last KCPE, which kicks off next week on Monday. On the top strip of the Standard today: thousands stare at eviction in Njiru, Masai Mau. And this, I think, is one of the biggest stories on the Standard, given that it's been covered on 3 pages, 5, 6, and 7. Other highlights: women's unpaid labor gives men playtime, and that's in the Financial Standard. And in sports, Arsenal fans hunger for victory, and that's on pages 38, 39. And if we may just turn over the paper: lessons learned in Spain's La Liga. That's what is headlining on the back page of the Standard today. Real Madrid held to a draw by Sevilla, while the 17-year-old helped Barcelona win at home against Athletic Bilbao. And this, for lovers of La Liga, there's a lot more you can read on the back page of the Standard today.
Hopefully you won't be cooking rice tonight. No pun intended.
Well, let's have a look at the Daily Nation this morning, and the headline have the same headline as the Standard. And why CJ Koome wants a life sentence scrapped. The judiciary has tabled 2 bills in the National Assembly that propose sweeping changes to the Penal Code and the Criminal Procedure Code, including the readjustment of sentences for murder and robbery to ensure proportionate punishment and abolishment of life sentences, which will be replaced the maximum sentence of 30 years in jail. That story there is on page 4 of the Daily Nation this morning. The amendments also seek to abolish petty offences and protect intersex persons. And that's the big headline on the Daily Nation. On the top strip of the Daily Nation this morning: squatters on Kirima city land given up to December 31st to live or face bulldozers. That story is on page 12 of the Daily Nation and also forms the basis of the conversation we'll be having at around 8 a.m. And more pain at the pump if tax proposal gets nod. Roads Board seeking to raise a fuel levy by 5 shillings. Story there is on page 7 of the Daily Nation. And looking at what is on the left strip of the Daily Nation: right hairs in court fight over family wealth. The family of deceased tycoon Taloshana Sairai is embroiled in a dispute over the ownership of Rai Investments Limited after 2 sons moved to court over alleged manipulation of shares. That story is covered on page 3 of the Daily Nation. And moving on to some matters, education. Lobby seeks to halt costly university loans funding plan, and the Kenya Human Rights Commission has filed a case at the High Court seeking to stop the Ministry of Education from implementing the funding model for higher education unveiled by the President in May. And that is the story that is on the back page of the Daily Nation this morning, looking at some matters of football. Man United desperate for win as Copenhagen come calling in Europe. That is the story that is covered on page 35 of the Daily Nation. Looking at some matters, business, shilling exchanges at 150 to the dollar. The official exchange rate of the shilling against the dollar yesterday crossed the 150 unit mark following a period of sustained and consistent depreciation. That story there is on page 6, of the Daily Nation. And looking at what is on the back page of the Daily Nation this morning, that story on the lobby seeking to halt costly varsity loans of funding plan. That is the Kenya Human Rights Commission. And also covered on the back page of the Daily Nation, says Kuria right on charges, Huduma Kenya chief says. And Huduma Kenya has defended Public Service Cabinet Secretary Moses Kuria on his position to charging fees for services. And that's what we have on the Daily Nation this morning.
Right, the front page of Business Daily goes with the same on the Daily Nation, the whole shilling exchange. And it says Kenya shilling official exchange rate hits 150. Bank selling at between 154.95 Kenyan shillings and 157 Kenyan shillings. 17.7% of value lost against dollar since January. If you have dollar reserves, good news for you there. The left strip of Business Daily, MPs plan new entity to regulate bank loans. On the right side there, that particular ticker, Treasury, they say what Kenya got from China. That recent visit by a Kenya delegation led by President Ruto to China was not motivated by a quest for new loans, according to the Treasury, despite previous indications the country will be seeking to unlock new funding for road projects. And in matters economy, on page 5, you will read that KRA is to waive under 230 billion Kenyan shillings in fines, interests for pardoned taxpayers. And in matters markets, commercial bank lending rates at 81-month high. And that is on the right side of that ticker. In matters intelligence, an op-ed by CS Soipantuya and Agnes Kalibata says the time is now for environmental, energy and food systems experts to resolutely come together to fight hunger. And finally, on that pull out there, matters life for the passion and obsession with orchards. That is on the front page of Business Daily this morning.
Tuangazie gazeti la Taifa Leo hii leo. Habari kuu kwenye ukurasa wa mbele wa Taifa Leo: kwa nini tunahepa Raila? Wanasiasa mbalimbali waliokuwa wandani wakuu wa Tinga waeleza kiini cha kutengana na kinara wao. Na kuna picha kadhaa za wale waliotengana na Raila Odinga, wakiwemo wabunge Tom Ojienda, Felix Odiwuor na wengineo. Wataja udikteta, utumwa, hadaa, ghasia na kuaibishwa hadharani ndani ya ODM kama sababu kuu za kumkimbia kinara wao na kujiunga na muungano wa Kenya Kwanza. Habari kamili kwenye ukurasa wa pili wa Taifa Leo. Vidokezo vingine kwenye ukurasa wa mbele wa Taifa Leo asubuhi hii: Kega arukia Ruto kwa mapuuza, adai katika idhaa ya redio kuwa rais ameanza kupuuza Mlima Kenya. Habari kamili kwenye ukurasa wa 4. Kwingineko, Uhuru akataa maridhiano, Kioni asema anayetaka kuzungumza na rais wa zamani afanye hivyo kimya kimya. Kidokezo kingine hapa: matibabu ya kansa ya CyberKnife, wagonjwa wa saratani wana nafuu baada ya teknolojia bora ya tiba kufika Kenya. Pale juu kwenye ukurasa wa mbele wa Taifa Leo, kahawa ya mtoa Gachagua kijasho, atoa kauli za kukanganya kuhusu zao hilo muhimu. Habari yenyewe kwenye ukurasa wa 5. Na kwenye spoti, masuala ya UEFA, Man United, Arsenal mawindoni, Red Devils yaalika Copenhagen, Arsenal ikizuru Sevilla leo. Habari yenyewe kwenye ukurasa wa 20 kwenye gazeti la Taifa Leo.
Naam, na tuangazie gazeti la The Star this morning. The top headline there, why newborn deaths spiral out of control, and auditor points to lack of basic equipment, commodities at level 1 to 3 facilities. And a picture there of the National Dialogue Committee, Ruto and Raila teams retreat to Naivasha to hammer out the deal. And looking at what is headlining on the Star, still on the very top strip, widow of slain Pakistan scribe wants corpse behind shooting prosecuted. That story there is on page 2 of the Star this morning. And on the left strip of the Star, how bill could trigger fresh LGBTQ debate. And yes, that is what that story there is on page 6 of the Star this morning. Also covered on the Star this morning, live coverage of protest media houses. Right, that is that story there is on page 8 of the Star this morning. And that is what we have on this Star. And an opinion piece there by Michelle Waikenda, Repair Society's Decaying Moral Fiber.
Right, People Daily this morning decided to focus on other stories. Well, apart from the whole Kirima case, the big story in People Daily says late by election, voter sues IEBC, electoral commission dead. So petitioner wants court to order selection team to name new officials who can conduct poll to replace dead MP. And CEO Marijan says staff cannot move or change boundaries without commissioners. That story is extensive on page 4. And there's a quote there by CEO of IEBC Marijan. Crucial operations at the electoral agency came to a standstill following the retirement of Chairman Wafula Chebukati and Commissioners Abdi Gulier and Boyamolu in January. The story is making it to People Daily on the bottom strip there. CPJ, so according to CPJ, 23 journalists have died in Israeli-Hamas war. And they have a photo there of what is happening in, that's actually in Gaza, the Gaza Strip. Just on the left strip there, just below there, here's the secret to happiness. They give you all that. Reminds me of the whole school of happiness.
Oh yeah,
yes. If you can actually be enrolling in the school of happiness, just to be smiling out here. On the top strip of People Daily, another blow against Nairobi homeowners on page 12. And actually, if you're a homeowner, you definitely want to be tuned in from around 8 a.m. as we discuss matters lands. Away from that, meet coach who inspires marathon star Kiptum. So how Rwandan-born trainer Hazi Kamana transformed humbled run into long-distance world champ. That is the front page of People Daily.
Let's cross the border now to Uganda and take a look at what's headlining in Kampala this morning. On the Daily Monitor, government to roll out a new injectable HIV drug. The long-lasting injectable cabotegravir, CAB-LA, has been confirmed to be effective and is being considered as key to national efforts to reduce the health burden of HIV/AIDS, which claimed 17,000 lives in Uganda last year. The story is covered on page 4 of the Daily Monitor. This is a big news in Kampala, and issues HIV and health still key in Uganda. That's a big headline on the Daily Monitor. The other story featured prominently on the front page, FDC feud, Besigye allies to start nationwide mobilization. And those are the big stories on the Daily Monitor in Uganda this morning.
Well, let's have a look at the Citizen in Tanzania this morning, and the headline there, why Tanzania leads East Africa in trade deals and acquisitions. And a new report shows that Tanzania was the leading choice of investors seeking opportunities for acquisitions in the region in 2022, The experts mentioning political stability, economic diplomacy, and a conducive investment climate as among the factors. That story is on page 2 of the Citizen this morning. And in numbers, $19.2 billion. This is a total of, there were a total of 297 deals signed in sub-Saharan Africa in 2022, valued at $19.2 billion. This is according to a study by the KPMG. And still on the Citizen, the top strip bee venom could be a game changer for entrepreneurs. And away from that, teen pregnancies are fueling maternal and child mortality. And away from that, we have the President Samia Suluhu now says use tech in trade dispute resolution, and President Samia Suluhu has called for harmonized intellectual property rights, adequate protection, laws and use of technology to resolve trade and commerce-related disputes in Eastern and Southern Africa. That is what's headlining in Tanzania this morning.
Kwingineko, habari kuu katika gazeti la Mwananchi, sura mbili, uteuzi wa Makonda CCM, wana cartoon pale ya Samia Suluhu na viongozi wengine katika nchi ya Tanzania. Kwingineko, sababu mkataba TPA DP kwa siri, wakati wadau wakihoji kutowekwa hatharini kwa mkataba wa uwekezaji wa bandari ya Dar es Salaam. Bosi TPA wanashiria waeleza kisa na mkasa. Vidokezo vingine pale juu, Chadema yataja sababu ya umaskini wa wananchi, na ya mwisho malori 250 yaliyokwama DRC yaachiwa, yazuiwa tena, madereva waonya. Taarifa nyingine hapa, diapers chanzo cha kusambaza UTI kwa watoto. Masuala ya afya hayo. Tukirejea hapa nchini Kenya, on the caricature this morning, masuala ya caricature, page 17 of the Daily Nation, quite an interesting and satirical bit here. Matters El Nino and the Ark. I believe that's an Ark. The Ark of
Noah's Ark.
We did have Noah's Ark. I don't know which Ark this one will be.
It looks very much like the Noah's Ark, and there's a tugboat there on El Nino preparedness that's pulling, was getting ready to pull the Noah's Ark. And the yellow is indicative of who's riding on the tugboat.
Love that one.
Well, that's a cartoon on the Daily Nation today. On the Standard, matters to do with what's happening in the Middle East. A fighter jet there branded with the Israeli flag, and Bibi as a pilot saying residents of Gaza are not my responsibility, and just launching a missile branded war crimes there. Just going to paint the picture on the war crimes being committed as a crisis in the Middle East continues.
Well, and on the People Daily, the cartoon is on page 10. And let me just quote a caricature of a man who looks like the current president, and talking to a Mama Mboga there. And he says, we set aside Kenya shillings, hundreds of millions, to deal with El Nino, which will start next week. And then we decided instead of El Nino, let's have the short rains. Then the Mama Mboga is asking, what happened to the money? Yeah, and that speaks to the whole conversation on El Nino and heavy rains, and the funds that were allocated to actually deal with El Nino. The Mama Mboga is worried. Where does the money go to now?
And actually, speaking of funds and where the money goes to, this particular morning you're curious, what are your expectations regarding the inclusion of the cost of living and the discussions by the National Dialogue Committee? What are your expectations now after the cost of living was included in the discussions by the National Dialogue Committee? Talk to us on our socials at TV47KE and TV47 News on X. We'll be sampling some of your feedback as we move on. Quite interesting, the fact that the thematic area of cost of living now really has to be, they really had to discuss after all these particular weeks now has to be decided and put in right now, and not the first one. As much as IBC matters are really crucial, talk about the whole border and all that, but then someone might think that cost of living should really be featuring among the first ever areas to be discussed.
It was the initial justification for these talks. It's only right that finally they agree on this matter.
Oh, yes.
Well, time now for a break. On the other end of this break, we'll be having Barrack, Muluka, and P.L.O. Lumumba in studio for State of the Nation. Do stand by for that. You're watching Morning Cafe. Welcome back. You're watching Morning Cafe on TV47 with me, Fred Indimuli. Time now to get down to discussing the state of the nation. This morning, we're very much privileged to have Barrack Muluka, strategic and political communications consultant. Bwana Muluka, it's a pleasure to have you in studio. Karibu sana.
See you after a long while, Fred.
Oh yes, it's been quite a while.
Yeah.
It's good to have you this morning.
Thank you.
And P.L.O. Lumumba, lawyer and Pan-Africanist. Also a pleasure to have you in studio this morning.
Good morning.
Yes. Now, gentlemen, even as we start this conversation, I'd like us to go to that question about, and it's a common question about where this country is heading. And we always ask, is the country headed in the right direction? And I'd like to borrow from a column by Makao Mutua on the Sunday Nation of October 22nd, 2023, on a curriculum on nation building. And Bwana Mutua opines that we need, if you will, a curriculum on nation building, a living, breathing compendium of Kenya's basic interests and its character that we must instill in our children. And it's the necessity of such that probably will start this conversation, even as we move to issues of the necessity of us relooking at our constitution. Do you think that, Bwana Muluka, that this country is headed in the right direction?
I think thank you, we have been headed in the wrong direction for a very long time. I think we made a false start 60 years ago, and we have never changed course. 60 years ago, in what sense? In the sense that we have always seen our country in the imagery of an antelope or a cake that people should eat. We have never seen our country in terms of productivity. We have always thought in terms of ethnic corners and what is good for us as an ethnic community. And even that has been done really in the prism of what you'd call a horse and horse rider, where there are certain ethnic kingpins who will say we are bargaining for our region, we are bargaining for our community. But in essence, they are seeing themselves as horse riders and the community as the horse. And the horses have been more or less willing anyway to be ridden by the horse riders. And so when you look at the country today in terms of education, in terms of the economy, in terms of the politics, in terms of the legislation, in terms of land issues, in terms of health care, in terms of virtually everything that a nation should focus on, we are in a bad place, and we've been so for the past 60 years. Are we about to change course? I'm not so sure.
Yet, P.L.O., for decades now, we've tried to pursue a different trajectory, especially with the new constitution, the promulgation of the new constitution, an agitation that started years earlier. Someone would think that at least with that, Kenya would have changed its trajectory, that probably this character that Makao Mutua is talking about, that we should be aspiring to, should have been part of our national fabric by now.
It is good that you've used the English word should have been, because as Barrack rightly says, when the foundation is wrong, and you engage constantly in repair work, then you can't achieve much. And when you look at this young nation, just 60 years since she regained her independence, you can see in all critical areas we have been doing things that are designed to undermine the nation rather than to build her. Remember when we regained independence in 1963, 1 year later, we went into a fundamental amendment of the Constitution to destroy institutions. We destroyed the Senate, we destroyed the regions, we dismembered the Constitution so very thoroughly that we had to reorganize it in 1969 and reissue it again. Then we started on the process of agitating for a new constitutional dispensation after we had met for 111 days at Bomas of Kenya and came up with a draft that reflected the people's views. The political class met in Naivasha after a failed referendum and after a near civil war in 2007, 2008, and came up with the draft, which is now the 2010 Constitution, which we have honored in breach, with the consequence that when it is politically convenient for a few individuals whose names we know, we bypass the Constitution and engage in extra-constitutional activities such as the bipartisan talks. The truth, therefore, is that we are weak in all our institutions. When there is the judiciary, it is weak. The legislature is weak. The executive appears to be strong, but fundamentally is also weak. The citizenry is now stimulated by ethnic and clan issues. The country is moving in the right direction, in the wrong direction. And if we love this country, which I think the politicians don't, then we had better pause and ask what it is that we can do. And as my friend Muhisa Kitui said several years ago, political bad manners will not be cured by bipartisan talks. It will not be cured by constitutional amendments. We must have fundamentally what one would call a character transplant. That is what Kenya needs going forward.
Okay. I'm looking at an opinion piece that you wrote about 11 years ago while you were still working as a National Director Communications at Raila for President Secretariat. That's about 2012. And you were talking about, you were warning against this eagerness by politicians to change the Constitution and to amend it to suit their needs. And this was only 2 years after the 2010 Constitution had been promulgated. And you even made reference to the Lancaster Constitution and quoted the founding father, President Jomo Kenyatta, saying that, yes, we accepted this constitution so that we could bring it back home and change it for ourselves. Is that what we're trying to do today, that we are still dissatisfied even with the Constitution 2010 and we're now looking to change it?
Thank you once again, Fred. I think our reflection within the political class on the Constitution has been very short-termist. And not just within the political class, even within the media. You know, Professor Wole Soyinka refers to the media, the journalists, as the interpreters. And he wrote a whole novel on that by the same title, The Interpreters. We are the ones who are supposed to interact with the civic activities, with the polity, to process it and to interpret it and communicate it to the population. Then, as today, the Constitution was looked at as a short-term entity that was supposed to serve the interests of the political class for the time being. And therefore, when we report about the Constitution and constitutional changes, we talk about things like Raila to take more power from Kibaki, Kibaki to lose power to Raila. Yeah? We look at it in the context of the players on the stage, in the arena for the time being. We don't take a long-term view of the laws that we are making. Within that framework, we can look at the ongoing so-called national dialogue. It's again focused on the interests of the current political class rather than on the long-term interests of the nation. So if you go back to Lancaster, and it was not just President Kenyatta, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga is in fact documented by Daniel Branch in a volume titled Kenya, A History of 50 Years, and which was published in the year 2008, was very categorical that we accepted a constitution that we did not want because we would get back home and amend it and give ourselves the constitution that we wanted. It was a constitution that they wanted as a political class, not a constitution that the nation wanted. In fact, you can call the Lancaster Independence Constitution an offshore entity. The people who are being molded into this entity that we were going to call the Kenyan nation, upon the departure of the British Crown and its Crown laws that we had subsisted under for a period of close again to 60 years, did not ask the people whom they had brought together much earlier, together with their other European brothers in 1884, 1885, in the Brussels and Berlin conferences that put these people in this geographical expression. And so, willy-nilly, we find ourselves beholden to the political class and its interests and entities. My brother, Professor P.L.O. Lumumba, talks of the 1964 amendments. The first thing that the amendment did was to give us a president whom we did not elect. That the person who, for the time being, is serving as prime minister shall, on the effective date, become the president. That the president shall nominate, or rather appoint, from the members of parliament, vice president, and a whole raft of other changes. And you can see that this was now the majoritarian KANU side of the political divide at the time, went on to swallow the opposition, to neutralize it, and to neuter the internal opposition within the KANU itself.
Yeah, but one would have thought that the process that led us to having this new constitution was a bit more inclusive as compared to the Lancaster process. And questions therefore arise over the kind of dissatisfaction we now see with the law because of the number of attempts we've seen in trying to amend it. Because between the year 2000, when CKRC was established and you were Secretary General of that commission, up to 2010, 2 referenda later, that whole process was really inclusive. Why the dissatisfaction now?
Let me tell you, and we have been here, this entire agitation within the political class to change the constitution was animated by the wrong reasons from the political class, because it was thought as one of the ways of removing President Daniel Moi. And you see that in 1992. And when we eliminate Section 2A, the political class, thinking that they would remove Moi, abandoned the agitation for constitutional change. Then when they lose the election in 1992, then they say, no elections without change. Then they think that Moi is going to be removed in 1997, and then they abandon that agitation again. Then between 1997 and 2002, they think once again that Moi is going to lose the election, and of course he does not. And I remember sitting at the Bomas of Kenya and John Njoroge Mishuki saying, we did not want a constitution. We wanted to remove Moi. Now that Moi has been removed, we don't need a constitution. I was there. And of course, the population thinking that a new constitutional dispensation would improve the quality of their lives was sufficiently educated through civic education. And we traveled throughout this country collecting people's views on land, on governance, on critically everything. The architecture of the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive. The people believed that a new constitutional dispensation would solve their problem. But the political class And they are the same players that we have had here for the last many years, crisscrossing from one political class to political party to the other. One time they are KANU, another time they are ODM, another time they are Jubilee. The political migration in this country to attain political office is what informs changes that we have made. So that after 2007, 2008, when we nearly went into a civil war and we had Kofi Annan and the 4 critical things that we had to be undertaken, the whole idea was that the people would be involved in the process of constitution making. And I want to say that the BAMBA's draft, which was adulterated at Kilifi and subjected to a referendum, what we call the Wako draft in 2005, was once again by the political class to achieve what was in their short-term political interest. And I know a politician, is still alive, so I will not mention his name, saying, a constitution is never made in peacetime. We must spill blood in order to have a constitution. I know that politician is active.
Wow.
And we spilled blood in 2007, 2008, and then in 2010 we had a constitution. But what constitution did we have? We had a constitution which borrowed from the BAMBA's draft, was tweaked by the committee of experts, and was fundamentally changed by politicians at Naivasha. Mm-hmm. And we all went into a referendum saying, let us just have it, in the very same way that was in Lancaster. People said, we know that this constitution has things that ought to be amended, but we have fought for it for so long. Let us just have it, we'll look at it again. Mm-hmm. So when you look at all these, the problem of Kenya is the quality of the men and women who have been in our politics for the last 25 years. They don't love this country. Wow. They manipulate the people along ethnic lines. They see politics as an industry. And we, animated by our short-term political interests and our ethnicity, follow them, and they lead us by the nose, and they know it, and they love it when they make us fight along ethnic, and today with devolution, along clan lines. The more we fight, the happier they are. Vita vya panzi, furaha ya kunguru.
Yet we are seeing that more and more we are leaving it to the politicians to even guide this process, especially the National Dialogue Committee. Where is the place of Wanjiku, if I may use that name, because there appears to be a knowledge gap that even 13 years after the promulgation of this constitution, the general public an understanding about the provisions of this law is still wanting. Yet politicians are pushing us to change. Do Kenyans even understand what exists and what provisions are there enough to seek amendments to it?
We've got to look at that within the broad context of constructive transformational change everywhere in the world. And one would say through the pages of history that there are certain very critical players, because even transformational changes that we may want to call revolutions in world history have indicated that the Wanjiku, if I understand you correctly about Wanjiku, because Wanjiku also becomes some kind of moving object that we cannot clearly define. But if I understand Wanjiku to be the very ordinary of the people in a polity, there must be another class that constitutes thinkers, that constitutes trailblazers, that constitutes thought leaders who then point out a direction that the country takes. The Wanjikus left on their own will always be robbed of the change, because they will normally agitate. They will normally say the cost of living is bad. They will normally say all is not well within this polity. But they tend to lack the sophistication, the depth to bring about the change that they would like to see. And therefore, their efforts will normally be hijacked by self-seekers. You can say that of the Mau Mau, you can say that of the French Revolution, you can say that of the Mexican Revolution, you can say that of the Filipino Revolution, where the self-same people, in fact, are Philippine. The Philippines are a laughing stock, the same people who were removed in 1986 right back into power, and there was a sense in which they were succeeding themselves. So we must ask ourselves, where is civil society in this country? Civil society played a very major role in the period 1988 2002. But when President Kibaki came into office, they were swallowed. A lot of them migrated into government, and to our surprise, they started doing the self-same things that they had agitated against. As Professor says, some of them are alive today, Prof, and therefore I will spare them the agony of naming them. The academicians, unfortunately, we operate in an environment where the distinction between what you call Wanjiku and the average professor in the average university, which most of the time is a village polytechnic that has been glorified and is referred to as a university. There's no difference in the thought capacity, the thinking capacity between the two. Both worship outside an empty ethnic shrine where there is no God except the God of false ethnic hope, because even when the ethnic kingpins ascend to power, the Wanjikus find that they are still in the same place. But where is the academy? What role is it playing? Where is the shrine? You remember the Ufungamano process in the 1990s and the contribution that it made. It was one of the very rare moments when we saw what we could call an ecumenical effort by the faith-based community to play a role. And they dropped the ball, Mzee, in my view, in 2005, when just like everybody else, they trooped behind the ethnic kingpin. It does appear to me like we must reboot to factory settings.
Okay. And it therefore brings a question on, because the claim has been, and this is what befell the BBI, that you talk about this class that should be able to guide the conversation. Yet the requirement should be that changing the constitution should be all-inclusive, and it should be probably, in the case of the BBI, it should be a popular initiative and should emanate from the people and not from any other class. We'll be answering that after the break. You're watching Morning Cafe. Welcome back. You're watching Morning Cafe with me, Fred Indimuli, on TV47, and I'm still in studio with Professor P.L.O. Lumumba, lawyer and Pan-Africanist, and Dr. Barrack Muluka, strategic and political communications consultant, talking about matters constitutional change. Just before the break, Barrack Muluka was telling us about the need of for this class that would be able to guide this conversation and guide the general public towards understanding where...
including the media.
Yes.
And which has dropped the ball repeatedly.
Okay.
The media passively follows the political class and comments on issues as if they were talking about a football match between Arsenal and Manchester United.
Well, I will refrain from trying to defend the media.
Let me, first of all, agree with Dr. Muluka when he says that the country must go back to factory setting. And you've talked about the BBI. The BBI, in my view, and I made submissions to Parliament on this, very fairly comprehensive submissions, acknowledging that there are things that required amendment in the Constitution. But the BBI was a Trojan horse. At that time, the BBI was an avenue via which individuals were creating offices for themselves. And the many sweeteners that were brought about were designed to hoodwink the public. And that is why it was fought. And that is why I thought that the timing was wrong. And that does not take away the fact that indeed there are things in the Constitution that ought to be examined. But when you look at the manner in which the political class treats the population, the Kenyan politician has the greatest contempt for Kenyans. He thinks we are fools. We are a bunch of misguided individuals who ought to be led by the nose. And what they do is to appeal to our ethnic sensibilities. Koigi Waamwere has written a book towards genocide in Kenya, the curse of negative ethnicity. I commend it for Kenyans. Because I never read what is reported about these politicians in the newspaper or in the television. I listen to them when they are at funerals, speaking in their mother tongue. That is when you get the full flavor of what their intentions are. And you could see that in the run-up to the BBI when you listen to the politicians, the promises that were being made to ethnicities. You cannot run a nation on the basis of deception and duplicity. And the other thing that Barrack says is that what is normally described as the intelligentsia or the middle class in this country has disappeared. They are just nominal in the sense that they have acquired and accumulated degrees, or that they have money which then places in the middle class space. But in terms of political orientation, there is no difference between your typical Kenyan professor and the person in the village. If they are from one ethnic group B, they are looking at their ethnic kingpin, who is assumed to have the monopoly of knowledge and wisdom. And until the day we liberate ourselves from that, then the nation called Kenya is in danger. Because nobody loves her in the political class. Mzee here started by saying that Kenya is seen in terms of an antelope. It is our turn to eat. Kenya is a cake to be a portion, not a motherland to be protected. And therefore, when we see all these efforts at amending the Constitution, which are championed by the political class, it is incumbent upon those who are patriots of this country to examine each and every one of them and look at the subtext. If we don't, once again, we are going to have jobs created for the boys and the girls.
And the Constitution has proven that at least for 13 years, it will not be easy to change it. But Professor, yourself, alongside a few other individuals, on the 27th of August this year, as we marked 13 years since the promulgation of this Constitution, you came out, addressed the media, and talked about the intention to institute a process towards changing the constitution through popular initiative.
Yes.
And you even promised to embark on an exercise to collect signatures. And after that, it's been almost 2 months later, we've not had much of that process. What happened?
Yeah, because Kenyans love drama. We are not in the business of drama. As early as Friday, I wrote to the CEO of the IEBC to confirm to me that whether the IEBC as presently constituted is legally capable of facilitating the collection of signatures, because it has no commissioners. I'm waiting for the response. In the intervening period, we have actually drafted a bill which we'll be sharing with the public so that they know what proposals we are making and how they can enrich it. But because we are a country that loves drama, our interlocutors must have expected that we would then be appearing from television to television station and radio station to radio station and buying media to give oxygen to this kind of exercise. This is a solemn exercise. It is a solemn exercise that must be taken very seriously, and we ourselves must not assume that we know what the people of Kenya want to be looked at by way of amendments. So we will, once we have received necessary confirmations from the IEBC, embark on the process of signature collection, only if we are told that it is valid. Otherwise, if we just commence it and is not properly constituted, we will be in trouble. But why did we do that? That is the most important thing. Why do we think that Kenyans ought to be involved in an exercise of examining their constitution? If you look at the way we have behaved in the last 13 years, and you look at some of the institutions that were created, for example, look at the commission that we have. Consumption without production. Do we need all of them? No, we don't. Look at our legislature, one of the largest in the world relative to our population and relative to our GDP, which does very little because the work that it ought to do is being done outside of parliament by a team of people who are heading bipartisan talks. It never discusses critical issues. And at any one time, I want you to look at the number of members of parliament outside of the country attending this or that conference, or members of the county assembly outside of the country attending this or that conference. So that the question is, should we have the legislature as constituted? Look at the number of constituencies we have. Do we need all of them? Look at the number of counties we have, 47. And each governor in this country thinks that they are president of a mini country. I want to tell you, for example, that maintaining a Kenyan governor is more expensive than maintaining the governor of any state in the United States of America relative to our GDP. And yet, we want to increase the counties rather than to reduce them. I'm telling you, these things need re-examination. And these are the things that we want to put on the table and tell the people, are we the richer? And I'll conclude with this. I live in my rural home where there is a member of parliament whom I've never met for the last many years, MCA whom I've never met. In my Nairobi constituency, I've never met my MP for the last many years. I've never met my MC, and yet I'm an engaged citizen. We take care of our garbage, we take care of our roads, we take care of our electricity. What do? The thing that I see occasionally along a poorly done road is a billboard with the photograph of an MP or an MCA saying, done courtesy of him. Courtesy of him? With whose money? Our taxpayers' money? These are the things that we want to be brought to the public so that we clean up this mess and have a constitution that will serve this generation and generations yet to be born to the extent that they will think that it is necessary.
And Dr. Muluka, listening to a professor here, whatever he says mirrors very much what we saw with the Punguza Mzigo initiative, the only other popular initiative to amend this constitution, of course fronted by Third Way Alliance and a gentleman by the name of Dr. Ekuru Aukot, who was also involved in the making of this constitution as a member of the Committee of Experts. Yet without political goodwill, it it would be easy to predict the future or
the fate
of this process. Don't you think that either way, any popular initiative still has to go back to the politicians for it to see the light of day?
I do not quite agree that it's only the politicians who eventually have a say. In fact, the people have got a bigger say, and the most material say than the political class has. That is why in 2005, the constitutional amendment or review effort failed. The referendum failed because of the power of the people. In 2010, when the people were persuaded by the kingpins that we go this way, again, we saw that the change did take place. What is lacking, however, is the people exercising that mandate in the best of their own interest, that they should listen to their true prophets. And their true prophets are not those ethnic kingpins that we talk about. And that, in fact, the media, and I mentioned that a little earlier, should play a different role. The media in this country behaves like a referee between two gladiators. And there's one gladiator who is defined on one side. At one point, the gladiators were Raila Odinga on one side and Mwai Kibaki on the other side. Then the gladiators became Raila Odinga on one side and Uhuru Kenyatta on the other side. Then they became William Ruto on one side and Raila Odinga on the same side, on another side. We need to look at the other efforts, the other initiatives, and interrogate them for content and for merit. For example, we have these people now who are talking of something they are calling the cost of living. And I agree completely that there is need to have a conversation on the cost of living. Mzee here does not quite agree, but I think I'm going to persuade him. Why? Why should these people talk about the cost of living? For the same reasons that Mzee here is mentioning. The size of government, the cost of government, that is the heaviest burden on the people of this country. If we are going to talk about the cost of living, we should not scratch at the surface and talk about the cost of fuel, the cost of food, the cost of... Those are symptoms. The real cancer is the cost of government. You look at the size of the legislature, as they says here, you look at the executive, what it's costing the country, you look at the devolved government, and I haven't seen the draft that they are working on. I'm going to give an expert opinion quietly at some point before they unleash it on the public. But I expect that we are going to see the proposal to reduce the number of the counties from the current 47 to say about 8 to 12.
Yes, indeed.
That is what we need, that we are going to propose that we reduce the number of MPs from the current almost 400 to say just about 90 or 100 and certainly not more than 120, that we are going to insist that the size of cabinet is respected as laid out in the Constitution, and that we do not have loopholes and openings for other entities to be appointed that seem to then blot the size of cabinet. If you look at what it costs us to do a simple thing like a celebration, such as we were celebrating Mashujaa the other day, and I've not seen any media house interrogate that, and that's why I'm accusing us. I see myself as having one foot within the media of abdication of our responsibility. How much has it cost us to road rail ourselves to this place. How much has it cost us?
The question then is, any attempt to reduce the size of government will definitely be met by resistance from the political class. Do you see your effort receiving any backing from politicians, without which it could go the same way as a Punguza Mzigo initiative?
This is the mistake we make, short-termism. First of all, let me correct Mzee by, I agree that the cost of living must be discussed. And in any country where you have functioning institutions, it is the function of parliament. And I've told some parliamentarians who are my friends, I would have wanted to see a bill in parliament, in the National Assembly, and even if it is not their function, a bill at the Senate and in the county assemblies saying this is how we propose that the cost of living be addressed. What I see is a group called bipartisan group, or engaged in bipartisan. It's not even bipartisan because it's a multiplicity of parties. This group has emerged out of a manufactured crisis, and they are looking for things to discuss. And because cost of living appears to be popular, it is added as a sweetener. The real reason why the bipartisan talks are going on is to create jobs for the boys. That is a truce that has come about because of political agitation. At the end of the day, I can predict that they are going to make recommendation that the Constitution be amended. They are going to say that certain offices be created for certain individuals. Fact. To make us believe that they care for the population, they are going to make certain recommendations regarding cost of living. So this is basically a Trojan horse once again, meant to cool the temperatures and to hoodwink the public. But in a properly ordered environment, as I've already said, Parliament should be dealing with this. This is how it's dealt with throughout the world. Otherwise, what is the role of Parliament? Coming to your question now, do I expect the politicians to resist? Yes, every politician in this country wants counties to be increased so that their tribe will have a county. If you ask the Kenyan politician, at the end of the process, we would possibly have 68 counties. If you ask the Kenyan politician, when they talk about the boundaries, the limitation, they think that they are going to create new constituencies. If you ask them, we would have more than 600 constituencies and many wards. That is the politician's thinking. So our proposals, which are well-meaning, and I supported the third way, Dr. Ekuru Aukot's Punguza Mizigo. It was fantastic in terms of recommendation, and we are borrowing quite heavily from it. And we are working quite heavily with Ekuru and others of like mind. The politicians will resist it. But even if they resist it, even if we appear to fail now, the seed will be planted in the fullness of time. And I'm urging you, Indumuli, when you are thinking about the life of a nation, don't think about 60 years. The seed that we are planting now will germinate even in 100 years. When you think like that, the only thing you do is to do your bit. You don't worry about whether this will be resisted. There'll be resistance. They'll say that you are paid by some unknown individuals. They say that you are doing the wrong thing. That is what, in fact, if they were to praise us, I would be shocked. So we expect it.
Okay.
But ultimately, history is consistent in sending only one message. An idea whose time has come cannot be resisted successfully.
Dr. Muluka, then it looks as if for any popular initiative to succeed, it would require other methods probably outside the provisions of the current constitution the way it is. Because if the law is to be followed to the letter, any such initiative without political backing will come to naught. If at all it goes the same way as Punguza Mizigo.
You know, when citizens have nothing to eat, they will eat the political class. And the Kenyan citizen is getting to a point where she has nothing to eat, and they are going to eat the political class. I said this 2 years ago. I say it again. It's not going to be business as usual. And a lot of these people live in an ivory tower. They don't understand what is happening on the ground. In fact, these people who are talking about the cost of living, if you ask any of them when they last bought a kilo of sugar, they went to the shop to buy a kilo of sugar, they probably have not done so for the past 20-something months, for the past 30-something months. And a lot of these things they talk about, they don't know. Professor is spot on. This is a Trojan horse full of red herrings. And the red herrings are such issues as the cost of living, because they are not going to touch it where it matters. And where it matters is where they sit. In those seats which we are saying they need to be reduced, they need to be diminished. By and large, people get to a point where they can no longer be resisted. I have, in other forums, stated, or rather reminded us, that revolutions and transformations do not begin from the top. Even when the top comes to the bottom and attempts to own the bottom and to take up the revolution, it does not happen. It happens through spontaneous tectonic forces from the bottom, because the bottom can no longer support the top. And at that point, and as Mzee correctly says, even if it takes 50 years, another 60 years, another 100 years, it will happen. Now, you may say to me that 100 years is too long. We are living here and now, and we want this change today. As a Christian gentleman, I take the view that posterity is extremely important. That when I read about the great men and women of God in biblical context, and God talking about blessing them, he does not tell them, I'm going to make you extremely rich. He tells them, I will bless your future generations. And leadership must at all times be thinking about future generations. Mm-hmm. Even as a parent, you are a politician, you are a president, you are prime minister, you are a minister, you are an MP, but you are also a parent. You must ask yourself about the destiny of your progeny. Where are they going to be in the future? 20 years from now, 30 years from now? You can look at families that we have known on this continent, for example, the Mobutus. What has happened to their progeny? You can ask about Messias Ngwema. What has happened to his progeny? You can ask about Mengistu Haile Mariam, who is now cooling his feet somewhere in Harare. What has happened? You must ask yourself about the legacy and about the comforts of your future generations. And so if the tidal wave will not sweep you away today because you have what it takes to resist, it will sweep away your children.
And there is a point you've made which are just, we are all mortal. And what pains me most is that a group of individuals in this country can sit somewhere and look at a constitution with a view to creating positions for mortal beings. You don't write a constitution that way. Mm-hmm. And there is something that Mzee also said here about the media. When the media is in a state of comatose and becomes a commentator of what is happening, then the country moves in the wrong direction. It is Hilary Ngweno in his days who said that the journalist in an African setting has a duty beyond being a reporter of events. He or she must be an interpreter of events and sometimes must be in the arena to speak to the right things, even at the risk of his neck being chopped.
Okay.
What is the role of the journalist that they said on that day of the meeting of the three estates? What Headman back then said, and yonder sits the fourth estate and the greatest of them all. The Kenyan journalist scene today, and I've been there in my book, Swearing by Kenya, I have a whole chapter about the role of journalists during the constitution making exercise, and it was negative, most of it. They were always looking for scandal, not for issues. So we are telling you now as journalists and through this medium that if Kenya is to change, all of us must have our hands on deck. Okay. And I want analysis. You've been asking thorough-going questions, but you've never interrogated the constitutional legitimacy of an extra-constitutional exercise called bipartisan talks, given a veneer of legality through parliament. When you do this kind of thing, you are undermining parliament, so that after every election cycle, we undermine parliament. Exercise bipartisan talks is an exercise of massaging egos of politicians. And let's call it by its name.
Okay. Okay. I want us to move on to another issue that could be also possibly a result of the ongoing talks, and this is a delimitation of electoral units. And the Article 89 of the Constitution provides that the IEBC shall review the names and boundaries of constituencies at intervals of not less than 8 years and not more than 12 years. But any review shall be completed at least 12 months before a general election of members of parliament. With the last review and delimitation of boundaries having happened in 2012, it means that the new deadline is in March 2024. Without the IEBC in place, this cannot happen. The IEBC itself has said once the chairman has been appointed, it will need 12 months, meaning by any standards, we are set to defy this provision of the Constitution. Now, 13 years after the promulgation of the Constitution, there are provisions that are yet to be implemented. Case in point, the 2/3 gender rule. If we proceed and defy another provision of the law, aren't we setting a precedent where we can just go against our laws and nothing happens?
I think the absence of commissioners with regard to review of electoral boundaries in this case, at this time, is what you would call an act of God. If an act of God can have positive connotations within the context in which those in law talk about acts of God, because acts of God are supposed to be deleterious, they're supposed to be negative to the overall good of the people. Like when there's a very destructive typhoon or tsunami, then we say this has been an act of God, and therefore what I owe you no longer obtains because it was completely beyond human control and a possibility of intervention. Because these are some of the self-serving clauses or articles within the Constitution and within other laws of the land, where those who crafted them were thinking not about the good of the country and the future, they were thinking about themselves. And we know, for example, that there was, within that time that you are talking of, some very prominent persons who were given the opportunity to define their electoral areas. And one of them even created a constituency for himself, carved it out very nicely, and said there will also be this constituency here. Yeah, there's one constituency in Western Kenya. There was another constituency in Murang'a that was specifically put in place with the individuals who had the mandate to review the boundaries, thinking about themselves. When we look at what we are proposing here, we're not proposing anything like we are going to see the constituencies being reduced. At independence, and for the longest time, this country had about 105 elected members of parliament and another 12 who were special MPs, the so-called nominated. And when you look at, in my view, the first, second, and third parliaments of this country, 1963 up to 1979, they were the most assertive, most effective, most efficient houses that we ever had. That is in spite of the fact that the opposition had been muzzled. We had removed formal opposition. But opposition is a spirit. It's not these parties that we see saying we are the minority and we are going to paralyze the National Assembly if our will is not done. I think today we are expecting some paralysis. Those people are not the opposition. They are part of the self-same ruling class. The opposition is an independent spirit, an independent voice that looks at things from a different vantage point and that proposes and positions a different idea, a different agenda that can then take the country forward. So when we talk about derogating or digressing from what the Constitution is saying, and we are supposed to be reviewing the boundaries and creating new constituencies, perhaps even creating new counties. I think it is a blessing in disguise that we do not have the IBC. And one would be thinking that an effort such as that which Mzee and his friends and the team are making will overtake this entire process, and that at some point we can have a different dispensation that does not allow for this kind of chimeric, this kind of kangaroo activity where the electoral constituencies are forever increasing, and we are having today you cannot even tell who is the MP for where. When we had 105, we knew who they were and what they were doing, and the names still come to our fingertips. We can still remember the fundamental motions that they brought to the House. We can remember what laws they influenced, in which direction. But now you have a huge gathering of people, some of whom have never even stood up to say to the Speaker, "How are you, Mr. Speaker?"
Yeah, but I want to very directly, there is this assumption, one, when you talk about the absence of commissioners as debilitating the entire functioning of IBC. That is incorrect. I've been in commissions where there are commissioners. The heavy lifting is done by the Secretariat. And it is the truth, therefore, that work should be going on. And if work should be going on, it should be determining whether to reduce or increase. In Kenyan mind and Kenyan speak, the limitation of boundaries means increasing, not necessarily. The IEBC can determine that in light of many things, we should merge constituencies. And that is what some of us are thinking about. For example, in Nairobi, if you ask some of us, Nairobi should not have any constituencies. Nairobi should be divided into wards and run like you do Abuja, and the mayor of Nairobi becomes an ex officio member of parliament. There are people like us who think like that. So when you think like that, don't be in the school that says because there are no commissioners, IEBC is not functioning. It's functioning and it is getting money and the secretariat is there. And remember, law is made for man, not man for law. There are things that can always be ratified. Number two, two-third gender rule. When the two-third gender rule was introduced, it was an affirmative action exercise, which means it is time-bound. And the architecture of the Constitution as it is now stands in its way. It stands in its way because once you only reserve 47 seats and the others are open, there is no way of enforcing and telling people that you must vote either gender. So these are some of the things that we are talking about. And if you look at the earlier BAMBA draft, one of the reasons why we were opposed to the creation of the 90 additional constituencies was that we wanted to introduce proportional representation with the zebra system, man, woman. Then you solve the problem. So these are some of the things that we are saying when we are looking at the Constitution to remind ourselves that affirmative action is time-bound, and number two, that we must have an architectural design of a constitution that enables all these. Otherwise, we'll go to court, we'll go to where, and ultimately we'll not be able to implement the unimplementable.
Okay. Yet this argument is alive, issues of boundaries, reviews and delimitation, especially in the Mount Kenya region, with that agitation for 1 man, 1 shilling, 1 vote, because any review is based on the population quota. After the 2019 census, it means that the number of people per constituency does change. It is the same. It's based on that this argument of 1 man, 1 vote, 1 shilling arises. When you say that probably this is one provision of the Constitution that probably is selfish or unnecessary, yet there are people in this country who are already talking about this kind of representation based on the numbers.
It remains a very hugely selfish agenda, however you look at it. I do not know what it is in the Mount Kenya region, populous as it is, or even my own home county of Kakamega, which is one of the most populous in the country. I do not know what new thing extra MPs would bring that the ones we have there are not bringing, if we are not just bringing up new layers of cost and burden to the taxpayer. I appreciate the fact that they talk about the CDF, I think it's called NGCDF, National Government Constituency Development Fund, and which is an anomaly because strictly in a functional democracy, the business of development should rest with the national executive. And we have tried to put it in disguise by introducing the prefix of NG, National Government Constituency Development Fund, but still thinking within those narrow corridors of a member of parliament who then becomes some kind of helicopter that determines what is happening within that electoral space, and therefore we would want to have more so that we can have more allocation. We have got to learn to start thinking as Kenyans. Learn to think about the development of the country as a whole. rather than forming some village entities. You can call them Kamwana, Kamwene. You can call them whatever else you want to call them. You do not hoodwink anybody. It is about ethnic supremacy that you would like to establish and lord over other people. But again, even that ethnic supremacy that we talk about does not percolate to go down to reach the Wanjikus of this world. It remains at the top within the class that Taban Loliong calls the eating chiefs. And the eating chiefs use this only as a red herring to hoodwink the rest of the massive population that we want more for you.
Okay. And this whole debate, yes, thank you for mentioning the NGCDF, the fact that the electorate, generally speaking, expects that the member of the National Assembly will be involved at the constituency level in terms of development. And you said correctly, Professor, that the law is made for man, not the other way around. It's expected to serve the populace. If at all that's the case, and the general population, in their own understanding and aspirations, they would want the member of the National Assembly to be involved in the development, which is a broader role beyond legislation, representation, and oversight. Don't you think that probably Wanjiku should be allowed to have that conversation if you want to broaden the role of the member of the National Assembly?
Let me, my brother, tell you, I think we've got to rethink governance in Kenya. We've got to rethink governance. And this is a very young nation which has the opportunity to rethink. Today, you have the Constituency Development Fund, most of which is misused. You have somebody called the administrator of the fund. Then you have the fund, it's the wards. These are layers of administration which are consuming without production. Experience in other countries, which we should borrow from creatively, tells us that that is a bad model. When you have a bursary, a member of parliament is now involved in determining who is entitled for bursary. We were here in Nairobi. When you would get bursary, there would be no MP, there would be no councillor. It happened through the school system. It was efficient. Today, a member of parliament calls a political rally at which he or she distributes checks. And the journey of carrying the checks is more in certain cases than the amount that is being distributed. This is drama. You cannot run the life of a country through spectacle and drama. And my view, therefore, is that we must have systems of governance that are efficient, and we make the members of parliament carry out their traditional role of oversight. They can only oversight objectively that which they have not been involved in spending. Okay. It is anecdotal now that most of these members of parliament and most of these people who are MCAs have companies in which they have proxies. They are engaged in trade. And when you say that the people have been made to believe, the people have been hoodwinked to believe. It is our duty to ensure that we remove the scales off the eyes of these people and the wax of their ears, that they know that there is a different model. Look at India, with a population of nearly 1.4 billion. How many members of parliament does it have in the Lok Sabha? 545 or thereabouts. Kenya, with a population of slightly over 50 and a GDP that is smaller than that of New Delhi in India, has over nearly 400 members of parliament, and we have 47 devolved units. India has only 28 states. We are getting it wrong. And those who come up with emotive issues such as 1 man, 1 shilling, 1 woman, 1 shilling, they also know that it is wrong. We are looking at Kenya as a nation. This idea that I hear people saying Mount Kenya, people saying Lake region, saying Coast region, is inimical to the development of the country called Kenya. Right now, we are talking about East African integration. Is that the language we want to carry to Arusha? When we go to Arusha, we still want to talk tribe. We still want to talk Mount Kenya, Lake region, talk about Luhya, Kamba, Kikuyu, is it Kalenjin? We ought to change our language so that we are a good part of East African community and a good part of the African continent. And there are different models. And let me tell you as I conclude, when our parliamentarians go to Germany and they go to Germany and discover that there are only 16 landers, which is the equivalent of our counties, how do they come back here and justify 58? When they go to Spain and they discover that there are only 17 regions and Spain has a GDP of 3 trillion, when they go to California with only one governor and has a GDP of 4 trillion, and they come here and they want us to divide the chapati into smaller units, and then you think the chapati is bigger simply because you did not divide it into 4, you divided it into 16.
Wow. Yet that perception, if I may call it that, that we need the CDF, it's been mirrored at the world level. And it's causing quite some trouble for governors, those who are yet to accept that the county assembly representatives need or require a fund at the ward level. And this has led to quite some trouble, which is undermining devolution to a great extent. Case in point, what's happening in Meru. The fact that from the onset, the governor was reluctant to entertain that conversation about giving money directly to the MCAs. Is this a conversation we should be having now?
It is a conversation that we must have. It is a conversation that must be spearheaded by the intelligentsia. It is a conversation that when I talk about the fourth estate, it should be spearheading, that we have more and more sensitization of the public on such matters, that when we talk about sustainable human development, the role of the legislators is to ensure that the executive, whether it be the county executive or the national executive, is doing what it is supposed to be doing. Accountability, public accountability. Putting in place enabling laws, policies, and regulations that are going to ensure that we have in place sustainable economic and human development. But what we are witnessing in all this agitation that you talk of, Fred, is what John Mark Gidongo referred to in the book by Michel Arong as our turn to eat. The MCS are groping for space, not to develop the wards, but to also eat, and also to use a portion of that kitty as an inducement in search of votes during the next electoral cycle, to say that I brought so many checks, that we took so many kids to school. And most of the time, what they're doing is what in scholarship we would call salami slicing. It does not become any bigger, as a prof says, just because you have sliced it into so many pieces. Lots of those children that we are trying to keep in school or to take to school on CDF cannot stay there even for 2 weeks, because what you have given them is infinitesimal. It is completely insignificant when you look at what they're supposed to be paying. But you want to say that this is my kitty, and I also want to have... There are some of these MPs who are known, for example, to withdraw a certain amount of money to take to a certain function. And in the evening, in the night, they're taking back, correct, that money or a significant portion thereof. When they arrive at a function, people are shouting, oh, there he is, there he is, there she comes, there. Yeah, like you would almost think they were Moby Dick, the whale. There she blows, there she blows.
I'll give a very...
Yeah?
When I was the director of the Kenya School of Law, a member of parliament is now with the Lord. Had 10 students from his constituents. The fees was 145. You know what he did? He gave each one of them a checks of 5,000 each. The consequence, 140,000 was not paid. In his constituency report, he said he paid fees for 10 students. This is what is happening. So we hear you, but what we are saying is that we must rethink governance. Okay. There is no reason why there should not be notional allocations for constituencies and notional allocation for wards. But these layers of administration that we have created, remember that the provincial administration as we knew it is still alive and well, consuming. Remember that we have the wards where there was one DC, you now have a governor complete with advisors, complete with MCAs, complete with cabinet ministers, complete with a security team, complete with a communication team. If you ask them, complete with tea consumption. In one county, they consume tea worth 12 million in 1 year. And if you ask them, now that you are consuming, what are you producing? Okay. Zero.
Okay. Gentlemen, as we come to the end of this session, I'd like us to talk briefly about political hygiene, even as you make your final comments. And I'll make, because I was going through, you're an author, and I was going through some of the titles that have your name, and one of them from 2008 was titled A Call for Political Hygiene in Kenya. And I was not able to access it, so I won't say I read it.
They published it through his Mvule. Yes.
And before the National Dialogue Committee, they're speaking about something with similar words. Yeah. And I just wanted to know, is this the same kind of predicament we're facing today? Lack of political hygiene back in 2008, is it still prevalent today? And is it similar in its appearance?
The situation is worse now. I remember when we grew up here in Nairobi and in my rural home, when during the campaigns, two opposing candidates would attend the same political rally, and one would articulate his vision and the other one would respond to the same crowd, and when they left, they greeted each other. That was the day, those were the days when you talked about the competition of ideas. Watanzania wanasema walikuwa wanapambanisha hoja, and the superior hoja won the day. Today, your typical Kenyan politician is like the wildebeest. He or she has migrated from no less than 5 political parties in the last 10 years. He or she believes in nothing except the pursuit of political power, because the biggest industry in Kenya today, if you want to get rich without any effort, be a politician or a senior civil servant or open a church. But we are talking about politics. So if we want to clean the political arena, we've got, number one, to ensure that there is fidelity to political parties. That I support. And this is one of the reasons why in the Constitution there was the whole idea of having presence in at least 24 of the counties so that you have a national presence. Number two, that you must have a constitution with some ideological orientation on issues, how to deal with health, deal with education. And 3, that we give you political parties fund. Unfortunately, that has only spoiled the environment, with the consequence that today there is no hygiene. And what does hygiene mean from where I stand? Hygiene means that you have a political arena where issues dominate discourse. I leave it there.
Okay, thank you. Your comment on this?
Yes, it's about generation of ideas. It's about intra-party democracy, because in our context, and we tend to forget where even the agitation for multi-party, restoration of multi-party democracy came from. It picked up in earnest after the 1988 so-called Mlolongo elections, where you had people with the longest queues being declared losers, and some with the shortest of the queues being declared their winners. You are not supposed to have a voice, an opinion, a mind, a conscience of your own. It was toe the line in earnest or quit, fuata nyayo. And that notion of fuata nyayo is still very much alive and well today, that within the political polity that is called the political party, you cannot have even a slightly different shade of the same opinion. There's only one opinion, and that opinion is the opinion of the Grand Master. And if you digress a little bit from that opinion, woe betide you. But then there's a whole ethnic community that sees that political party as a religion, and the leader of that political party as a god who has got to be worshipped. And we saw in a by-election in this country a couple of years ago in the last parliament that one of these leaders was in a constituency where that by-election was taking place. And he was telling the electorate that these parties are like religions. And our religion is this party which is called such, such, and such. And if anyone comes here and tells you anything outside this, that person is not within our religion. And we should reject that kind of person. That is the sort of hygiene that one is talking about, that we must agree to disagree, even as we remain within the same formation. That to think differently is not betrayal, it's not treachery. That hygiene, that thought that we can vote for somebody who is outside this party that some people consider to be our religion, that hygiene we need.
Indeed.
Dr. Barrack Muluka, a strategic and political communications consultant, and Professor P.L.O. Lumumba, lawyer and Pan-Africanist. What a lovely conversation we've had this morning with these two gentlemen. Asanteni sana.
Asante sana.
Very well considered opinions on the matter of constitutional change. As we look at the state of the nation, gentlemen, as we come to the end of this session, allow me to go through this editorial comment. Now, our attention has been drawn to two distressing news headlines. First, we learned of the tragic loss of 10 lives in suicide, in Kilifi in a month. And then we were saddened to hear that 4 more individuals took their own lives in Kirinyaga County within the last 1 week. What struck us in these heartbreaking cases is that the majority of those affected were men. Kenya undoubtedly is grappling with a multitude of challenges. The cost of living has soared, unemployment rates are high, household incomes are shrinking, and taxation is on the rise. The deteriorating quality of family life, as well as growing cases of marital conflicts, further compound these difficulties. These issues affect all members of society, not just men. But it seems our brothers are facing a unique set of pressures. The weight on a man's shoulders to provide for his family, even when he has little means and has reached his breaking point, can be overwhelmingly burdensome. As a society, it is our responsibility to ensure we support our own. We must reevaluate our expectations in light of the harsh realities we face. Much is said about the scourge of illicit brews that continue to claim the lives of young men who often seek solace in alcohol. As we seek to tackle this menace, we must also do more to rescue the Kenyan man from despair. Giving more consideration to the men in our lives and their well-being could be the key to improving our society in general. Men, too, should prioritize their mental health and overall well-being, ensuring that they are in a position to change their circumstances for the better.